Welcome everybody. It's great to be here. I want to talk about how a traditional company like Shell can have a role in a world where, the energy system is transitioning. And I do think the role of companies like Shell are sometimes misunderstood. I really want to lay out a case about how complex it is and what companies like Shell can do about moving with that transition. But fundamentally, the world is increasing in population. It's going from about 7.6 billion to the estimates of about 9.6 billion by 2050. Probably the energy demand for the world will double between now and 2100. Every day, there are 2 more Cambridges in terms of people on the planet. That's at London every 40 days. And how do we manage growing and becoming more prosperous at the same time as decarbonising the energy system? It is a fundamental challenge. Now, Shell is a big company. Shell is a company that, as you can see here, produces about 2% of the world's oil, 3% of the world's gas. It's a company that has about 50% of its production is actually gas, and it is the largest private company in what's called liquefied natural gas. So about 22% of all LNG delivered anywhere in the world is through Shell. So it's a big part of our business. It's also a company that has a lot of customers. 30 million people turn up on our forecourts every day, 43,000 retail sites across the world. It is a company that also is trading, one of the largest trader in renewable energy, 3.5 gigawatts of renewable energy. It's a company that has developed one of the largest carbon capture and storage projects in the world, in Canada. And it's a company that is recently investing in a large wind farm off the Netherlands, 680 megawatt wind farm. So it's a company that has a diversified portfolio, but its root still is fundamentally in oil and gas. So how are we going to take this world that needs to decarbonize forward? How are we going to make sure that the world has more energy with less CO2? Well, we did a scenario, and we issued it last year. And that scenario was basically looking at what it would take to get to net zero emissions in the world. So the world is going to have to, before the end of this century, have net zero CO2 emissions. And to do that, we essentially have to electrify rapidly. We have to grow biofuels. We have to have a massive increase in the amount of carbon capture and storage. Why? Because decarbonisation is very difficult to do completely. Even in this scenario, we had about 25% of the world's energy, even at the end of the century, were from fossil fuels, from coal, gas, and oil. But it's not just what's going to happen in Northwest Europe. It's what's going to happen across the rest of the world. What's going to happen in the developing nations? Because 20% of the world consumes 50% of the energy. The other 80% of the world are looking for the lifestyles we enjoy. And it's what's happening to the developing world, where they're using 20 to 50 gigajoules per year per person, and aspire to have the amount of energy that we're able to have at our disposal in order for heating, for cooling, for transport, for the way we just go about life. And the Sustainable Development Goal 7 is all about delivering reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy. And that's going to be our big challenge. 1.1 billion people in this world have no electricity. Another billion have intermittent electricity. And so this energy transition change has to change fundamentally in the developing world at the same pace that it is starting to happen in the developed world. And lastly, in transport, because I want to address transport, because everyone thinks that Shell is all about transport, and what happens with electric vehicles and how fast did that progress. So if we look at transport, and if we look at how easy it will be to decarbonise transport, the passenger transport, we can see electric vehicles growing now, and we can see they're starting to become competitive. I don't think there's any dispute about that. But freight is going to be more complex. Marine is going to be even more complex to electrify, and aviation as well. And we don't see those transitions, but even in our scenario for the end of the century, fully being able to decarbonise. Now, clearly, battery technology is advancing fast and the costs are coming down, but not of the scale and size for some of those much larger transport vehicles. So then if we look at electric vehicles and we look at their penetration rate, about 1% of the world's vehicles are now electric, the ones sold. By the middle of the next decade, and this is quite an aggressive scenario, we see about 10% of the world's vehicles. So actually about 11 million vehicles a year will be electric vehicles. And probably 35%, this is in the world, this is not just the UK, 35% sold in this scenario by 2035. By then, about 20% of the world's vehicles will be electric in this particular scenario. But as you can see on the right there, the number of vehicles is growing very fast. So in this aggressive scenario, there's more internal combustion engine vehicles in 2040 than there are today. Now, that's not an excuse for an oil company. That is just a reality of how fast it's going to take to penetrate the world with electric vehicles and how quickly this transition will occur in all parts of the world, not just what's going to happen in Norway or here in the UK. And I think that's an important kind of challenge that we face, is the pace of that change. And if we go to some of our forecasts and look at the demand for oil going forward, and this is not quite as aggressive in terms of penetration of electric vehicles. This is how oil is consumed, so about 90 million barrels a day. You see that actually the passenger cars in this scenario is going down. Although there are more internal combustion engine vehicles, actually the demand in the passenger area is lower. But because of how difficult it will be to decarbonise the much larger vehicles, you see that things like freight and aviation and marine will mean there's a chance, and we're not saying this is something we're looking forward to, there's a chance that oil demand may even be higher in 2040 than it is today. Now, that's not consistent with a 2°C world. Now, I'm not showing that because I go, look at this, isn't this great? That is a reality about how energy systems change and how long they'll take to change. And for me, who's responsible for Shell's oil and gas production, the existing fields decline at about 5% a year. So even if we go flat in demand, we need 6 Saudi Arabias by 2040 of new production from new projects because it's a depleting resource base. So activity level in oil and gas business are going to remain quite high if they're going to meet that world demand. So we don't create the demand, we deliver a product that the world demands. Now, that said, the system is in transition, and actually that said, everyone in the leadership of Shell is determined that Shell thrives through that transition. It also is incumbent on us to make sure that we help in that transition, and we're part of the solution. Now, if you look at what it takes to get to 2°C, we are going to need massive efficiency improvements. So this is the biggest lever. It's just how we go about our business. It's just how well insulated our buildings are. It is fundamental efficiency. It's how we pool logistics. The second thing is going to be renewables, and a penetration of renewables in this aggressive 2°C scenario is going to require solar and wind probably to become 5 to 10 times cheaper than it is today. It's going to require batteries to go from about $300 per kilowatt to 100, so a third the cost of batteries. It's going to require also CCS. It's going to require 300 world-scale carbon capture and storage projects every year, like the one we built in Canada, in order to achieve the objective of this 2°C scenario. So it's going to require all of us and all governments to create the frameworks that people will invest against that scenario. Now, we actually believe that gas is an important part of this. Actually, the UK has done fantastically well in the last, from 15 to 16. One of the reasons was the conversion of coal to gas. Why? Because of a CO2 tax. The US has improved massively, as we saw earlier. Why? Because of coal to gas transitioning, because of very cheap shale gas. So gas is going to have a really important role. And actually, we see gas demand increasing over this time. Gas also is great to work with renewables around intermittency. So you can bring a gas-fired power plant on very quickly. Gas has half the CO2 of coal and a tenth of the harmful emissions, particulates and other emissions. So gas is going to be a really important part of that transition, and that's why, one of the reasons we bought BG, one of the reasons we built such a large LNG portfolio. But we are doing other things. So we are building significant solar arrays, particularly in our joint venture in Oman. We have the wind farm. We're building 400 hydrogen stations in Germany in order to seed and try and develop a hydrogen economy. We have our CCS portfolio of projects. But also we're extremely strong advocate for a CO2 price, which seems odd for an oil gas company to want a CO2 tax. But we do need the economic signals to invest in the things that will make the 2-degree scenario happen. It won't come just because we're financially strong. It will have to have an investment signal behind it. And that's why we believe it's going to be really important that we get the right advocacy. So we've been advocating for a CO2 price for a long time. We did sign up to the Governor of the Bank of England's initiative on the transparency around our financial disclosures. We are one of the leaders in Carbon Pricing Leadership Group and the Climate Leadership Coalition. We are working with 10 governments around the world about setting regulation that will help this energy transition take place. Now, clearly for Shell, we have a challenge in our business and the system transitioning. But we're very keen to work actually with universities like Cambridge on the innovation, on unlocking the potential that we have through innovation to go through this energy transition. But also the role we see in great universities like Cambridge to help Shell, companies like Shell with that energy transition. Thank you.